All right. It's rib day. You can see we've got 2 racks of spare ribs here. You could do baby backs. This will be the same method no matter what. I prefer spare ribs for several different reasons. 1, there's more meat. 2, there's more fat, and as we know, fat equals flavor. 3, they're cheaper than baby backs. They cook, might take a little bit longer to cook spare ribs, and they take a little bit more work to start off. As you can see, we've got some flaps here of fat that we're going to trim off. You know, some stuff like this. That'll burn and cause problems. So we're going to get rid of that. We're also going to look at the ends, and we want to kind of trim those up a little bit because, of course, those will just burn. And we've got the same thing going on up here in a couple places. This is real easy to do. You don't have to overthink it. You don't have to take off too much. We also want to make sure that we remove the membrane. This is the membrane here. A couple different ways to do this. One is to just slide a little butter knife or something up there to loosen it up. Then you take a paper towel and you just peel it off. And you don't have to go crazy worrying about this. Just get off as much of it as you can. It's tough. It prevents the rub from getting really into the meat, so you lose some flavor there. It's just generally a good idea to get rid of it. Now, in addition, on the spare rib, we see this kind of flap of meat here. If you trim that off, you can. I generally will trim a little bit of it off because, you know, as you can see, there's a lot of fat there, but I don't trim it all the way. It's nothing to worry about. You just want to get rid of this loose bit that, like this stuff, that's just kind of hanging out there. You know, that's no good. That'll just burn and char. And then if we look at the top of the spare rib, we've got this piece here, and you can kind of feel it if you feel with your thumbs that it's above the bones. This is the rib tip, and if we trim this off, take a knife and just trim that off straight across and square up the edges and take this off, then we get St. Louis style ribs. You can do that. I've done it before, and I'll probably do it today. I'll trim off this tip piece, and what I do is I don't throw that away. I actually will put that on the smoker along with the ribs, and this becomes a little pitmaster treat as we're cooking because it'll cook a little faster. You can also cube it up and make burn ends if you want. They're not, you know, real burn ends are from the brisket point, which of course is from the cow. But you can make pork burn ends. They're very tasty. You got to be careful not to dry them out, not to make them too tough. But they're quite good. So this video today is all about not overthinking your ribs. Ribs are one of the easiest things to put on your smoker, one of the easiest things to deal with. They don't have to be complicated. They're also relatively cheap cut of meat. One of the things, I mean, probably the easiest thing to put on your smoker is a pork butt. This comes in a close second. A lot of people are overthinking it, and it's just wrong. First thing to get rid of in your head is the 3-2-1 method. Every piece of meat behaves differently. Different rubs will cause different issues, different temperatures, different sauces, different baste. You know, I mean, there are all kinds of variables in there. So I hate the 3-2-1 idea. I wish it would go away because it confuses a lot of people and they wind up screwing up their ribs. Sometimes it works, and when it works, it's great. But we're going to do something different today. We're going to do more of a Kansas City style or a Missouri style rib. And that's one of the reasons we're using the spare ribs. You know, now down in Memphis, they do a dry rib. And of course, Texas does it different. What we're doing today is more of a Kansas City style. We're starting with 2 rubs. Our base is going to be a salt, pepper, garlic rub. And then over that, we're going to do the Killer Hogs barbecue. This is a sweeter rub. And as we're cooking, we're going to be basting. And today, we're going to be using a mix of apple cider vinegar and water because I don't have any apple juice in the house. And after about an hour and a half, 2 hours on the smoker, we'll start basting this with that mixture about every 30 to 45 minutes until we're pretty close to done. And when we get close to done, and I'll show you that throughout the video, when we get to where that break starts happening, then we'll sauce and let it ride for another 15 to 30 minutes, depends on our sauce. So I'm using a homemade sauce today. And that's the difference, really. In Memphis, you get a dry rub. They don't sauce them. It's all about that seasoning, or a dry rib, I should say. Same in Texas. Today, we're doing this the Missouri way. We're not even going to wrap. And I'm going to show you why we're not going to wrap. I'm going to show you why restaurants don't wrap. But anyway, here we are. I've got our spare ribs. I'm going to get to prepping, and I'll show you what they look like once I'm done prepping. Okay, so we got it all trimmed up. And today I decided to go ahead and leave the tip on, as you can see. So there's not really any bone there, and you can feel with your fingers where the bone's in, and it's right in there, and then it comes across in an arc. So all this this is meat. Very good stuff. And like I said, if we were to square that off, then we have a St. Louis rib. That's okay. I did take the flaps off, and this is it here. And you can see there's a little bit of fat in there, but it's mostly pretty lean. Now on the other side, you can see we've got our fat band. I'm going to put some rub on that little bit, stick it on the smoker along with my racks, and that's going to be my treat today. Now, as you can see, it looks a lot different once we remove that membrane. And sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's difficult. These were pretty easy. I did use a paper towel just to grip it and was able to peel it on off. And you can see the flaps gone here. You can see still got a little bit membrane left. Don't drive yourself crazy trying to get rid of all of it. You never will, and you're just going to spend too much time prepping. Now, as you can see here, we've kind of trimmed up our loose bits. You know, it's not perfect. Doesn't have to be perfect. We're not in a competition here. We're cooking this for home. I mean, it is what it is. Now, one of the things you want to try to avoid when you're trimming meat is try to avoid 90-degree corners, because those will burn. So this is what it looks like on the bone side. And if we flip them over here, we can see our rack. Boy, this is difficult to do with one hand, let me tell you. These are big racks. So here's our meat side. You can see quite a difference here. So normally you would want to go through here, and if there's large amounts of fat on there, you go ahead and trim it off. These were pretty good shape, so I'm not going to worry about it. I might trim just a touch more off over here. And when you're trimming this stuff, you don't want a big heavy chef's knife. You want a boning or a fillet knife, you know, something that's going to give you some flexibility and control. But you don't want to trim all the fat off either, because again, the fat is where the flavor is, and you'll wind up with dry meat. So these look really good. I'm just going to take off a couple of the like this knob here. I'm just going to take that off. So yeah, there we have it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to rub it. Again, we're going to start with the salt, pepper, garlic, and then end with the barbecue rub from Killer Hogs. And we're going to let that sit in the refrigerator in a pan for a couple hours before we put it on the smoker. Now, you can go ahead and bring it up to room temperature after it's set in there if you want. In my experience, it doesn't really make much difference. You know, some people will say, well, it won't take smoke if it's too cold, and I've never experienced that. I don't know, you know, if that's accurate or not, and who knows. But this is the way I do it. I really like it. My wife really likes it. This is simple. Normally, when I do ribs, I go a little crazy. I'll try new recipes and stuff. But today, we're just keeping it simple and traditional. Nice, good meal. We're going to have some baked potatoes and some green beans and mushrooms to go along with it. And that's pretty much it. As far as wood, you know, apple goes really well with pork. I've got a blend of pecan and apple in my smoker now, so that's what I'm just going to use that and have some fun with it. Yeah, all right. I'll talk to you later. Now, one thing you'll notice here, I've just got the salt, pepper, garlic blend on this top side here. I'm not going super heavy. You don't need to with ribs. You know, pork butt, you want to go real heavy because you got that huge, thick piece of meat. You really want to get that flavor in there. On ribs, it's not really necessary to go super heavy. You do want to be quite liberal with it. And also, even though it's called rub, you don't actually rub it. What we're going to do is we're going to pat it, kind of like blotting a stain, right? Because if you rub it, you're just going to take off all your seasoning. Here's a good example right here. If I were to rub that, now I've got clumps and I've lost my seasoning in that area. So we just pat it down. We're going to let that first layer, that first flavor profile just sit there for about 5 or 10 minutes, and then we'll go with our next one. Okay, so now we've got both layers of our rub combination on there, and we're just going to let it sit. Again, before we flip these over, want to let it sit there for a few minutes just to kind of absorb that rub. Now today, you'll notice we didn't use a binder. I rarely use a binder. You can if you want, makes no difference. Basic yellow mustard works well as a binder, and the mustard doesn't impart any flavor at all to your food. It burns that out. But you could also use oils, avocado oil, you know, canola oil, doesn't really matter. I don't like using extra virgin olive oil because I find the flavor to be too strong. I don't want to impart that. So use regular olive oil if you want. you know, the reason I don't use rubs binders very often is because I don't find it's necessary. I'm not competing with my barbecue. I'm cooking it for my wife and I. The binders will sometimes help you develop different colors and that kind of stuff and really help the rub stick. However, if you're not starting out with a super dry piece of meat, then the moisture itself in the rub, or the moisture itself in the meat, is going to act as a binder. So it's not really necessary to add additional moisture to that. In addition, you know, it's kind of a waste. And a lot of times what I do with ribs, I didn't have to today, but when you buy ribs, any kind of cut of ribs, you really got to watch and make sure you don't have bone dust on the meat. You really don't want that. It's a bitter taste. It's not good, and it's a weird texture. So sometimes what I'll do with ribs is when I take them out of the cryo pack, I'll go ahead and rinse them under cold water just to make sure that I don't have any bone dust on there. These were really clean. These were really good-looking ribs, so I didn't have to do that. And then when you're done rinsing them, you pat them dry with a paper towel, and that moisture that's left on there is plenty to hold your rub. You don't need an additional binder. Now, the other benefit to not using a binder is we're allowing the rub to sit here for a little while to kind of pull some of the moisture up out of the meat. So it's really going to kind of force it down in there, and that'll happen as it sits in the fridge for a couple hours. Some binders, if you use a binder, it'll block that action. It's not critical, you know. I mean, I could put this right on the smoker right now, but I'd rather let it sit for an hour or two. So anyway, I'll come back in a few. Okay, we're looking at the bone side here, and you can see over the bones, I didn't go particularly heavy with the rub. They're bones, you're not eating them. However, there is some meat in between them, so you want to make sure you get some rub on there. So at this point, we're done prepping, and we're just going to put them in the fridge. And that microwave light's a pain in the butt. We're just going to put them in the fridge for about an hour or two and let the rub do its work, and then we'll fire up the smoker and we'll be good to go. Okay, just a couple quick tips. I've already cleaned up my mess, as you can see, but just to give you an idea, if you're not making a mess, you're probably not applying your rub right. And here's why I say that. When you are applying your rub to your barbecue, you don't want to be just right down on the meat, gently sprinkling. You need to get up, 10 inches or so, and really shake it. And the reason you do that is because you'll get much more even coverage of your seasoning. It'll spread out a lot more. You won't have clumps and high spots and low spots. It's just going to be easier. However, it is messy. So, if you can do it outside, great. I usually do in the summer, but it's cold today. It's, I think, 32 or something, right around there. It's spitting snow, and quite frankly, I didn't want to do this outside, so I didn't. So another thing is, when I'm prepping barbecue, I like to use a plastic cutting board. I don't like to use my wood cutting boards. The real reason is because the paprika and everything in the rubs could stain that stuff. I don't want to do that, so I'd much rather use my plastic cutting boards. Also, when you're dealing with raw meat, they're easier to clean, easier to make sure that they're sterile. Downside to them is that they move around a lot, as you can see here, just sitting on the stove. Well, a trick for that is you take a paper towel, spread it out, and wet it, and put it underneath your cutting board, and it won't move. So that will help you maintain a safe surface. Also, on your knives, if you want to maintain good knives with good edges, don't leave them sitting in the dish drain. Make sure you clean them as soon as you can. I never put my good knives in the dishwasher, and you can see this is just a cheap Sam's Club boning knife, but I still maintain it just like I do my others. I always wash them by hand, and I like to dry them as soon as possible. Sometimes I don't manage to do that. Sometimes they do sit there, but you don't want to do that. Also, I always hone them every time after use before I put them back up on the wall. So those are just a few quick tips, and you can take them or leave them. All right, we got our smoker up to 250 degrees. Got our welding blanket out here for insulation. And you can see these have been sitting in the fridge for about 2 hours. You can see how that rub is really soaked into that meat. And you can see some of the moisture pooling up there on top. That's what we want. That's what we're looking for. So you see it just kind of glistens and it's really soaked in there. So we're going to put these on. Again, it's 250 degrees. You can do 275 if you want. I like to go a little slower with spares, just because they're thicker. So we'll put those on in about an hour and a half or so. We'll check it, and we'll start spritzing at that point. You don't want to spritz too soon, because if you do, you'll just hose off all your rub. So you want to wait till that bark gets nice and set. And that's it. So we'll see you in a little bit. All right, so this is a new toy I picked up at Harbor Freight for about $5 the other day on sale. This is what I'm going to use to spritz my barbecue, and it's just a little pump sprayer. It holds a half a gallon. Obviously, we're not going to put that much liquid in there because that would just be a waste. The way it works, you put some liquid in it, give it a couple pumps, and then you get that nice steady spray. Sure beats the spray bottles that I'm used to using. However, you want to make sure that you don't put any kind of seasoning or particulate in there, because it'll clog up this nozzle, which it's adjustable as well. We're just going to use a mix of 1-to-1 apple cider vinegar and water for spritzing the ribs, and that's just because I don't have any apple juice. Normally I would just use straight apple juice. When you do use apple juice, you want to make sure that you get stuff that says in the ingredient list apple juice and water, or just straight apple juice. A lot of the cheaper juices, they have all this other syrup and everything else. I prefer the Simply brand because, again, you look at the ingredients, it says apple juice and water. That's all you want. So there you go. We'll got the ribs on the smoker now. We're going to put our potatoes on in a minute, and I'll let you know what happens then. All right, our ribs have been out here about an hour and a half, 2 hours. Time to check on them for the first time, so let's go ahead and see how they look. Ooh, see, we're already starting to get some nice pull back there. Starting to get that nice mahogany color. Looking good. Oh yeah, that's looking good. So we're going to go ahead and hit them with a little bit of juice here. It's our new sprayer. You don't want to soak them, but you want to make sure, you know, that they stay nice and moist. So we'll just hit them real lightly. See my little nuggets here. They're looking quite nice. We're going to go ahead and pull 1 or 2 of these off, see how they taste. Got a little stuck there. That's alright. These are just chewy little treats. And that's just lovely. Well, there you have it. Okay, we're right at 4 hours on our ribs. We've been spritzing about every 45 minutes or so. You can see they're really looking nice and dark. Got that nice pullback on the bones there. So I'm going to show you how to tell if they're done or not. What we want to do is we want to pick them up with the tongs. You see how that's starting to break there? These ribs are ready. So what we're going to do now is we're going to glaze them up, leave them sit out here for about another 20 minutes or so, and then we'll take them off and cut them up, see how they taste. All right. Okay, just want to show you when you're glazing these, we don't want to go super heavy. Just want a nice layer of sauce across the top. So just about like that, not super heavy. And then you're done. Really. Okay, so we got our glaze on there, and like I said, it's fairly light. You don't want to go super heavy. What we're going to do is we're going to close the lid on this. We're going to let that go for another 15-20 minutes. What we're looking for is a nice sticky consistency. We don't want it. We don't want to burn that glaze or the sugars in it, but we do want it nice and tacky. So it doesn't take very long, and then our ribs will be done. They don't need to rest very long, more than about 10 minutes tops. And then we'll slice them. We'll dig into them. And the sauce I'm using is a Kansas City style homemade sauce. Kansas City style sauces are tomato based, basically, and somewhat sweet. So they're quite tasty, quite lovely. In here a few minutes, we're going to be eating ribs. Okay, so total cook time about 4.5 hours. No wrap on these ribs. Now, because there's no wrap, it's not fall off the bone. That's not what we're going for. Fall off the bone is when you wrap it, and basically the meat just kind of disintegrates. It's okay if that's what you're going for. I like a little pullback on mine. However, you can see if we try to pick it up, it just starts cracking there on the top. It's got no strength. You can see I just barely picked it up and it broke right through there. Also, if we look at a bone here, I should be able to pull that bone out clean. And that's just perfect. Now, if we wanted, we'd pull all these bones out, and we'd have a real McRib, our own kind of McRib. And normally when we cook ribs, we're going to let those rest for just a few minutes. Again, doesn't need to rest long because it'll get cold. Of course, we got a sample, right? So there's a sample for the videographer. And a sample for me. Very warm. Gotta let it cool off a little bit. But there you have ribs. And to cut, slice it in between the bones or in between 2 or 3 bones, however you want to do it. Plate it up and serve. And you can notice our sauce is nice and tacky and sticky. That's just what we want. So we're going to eat. Bye.